In the frozen hell of the Carpathian Mountains, soldiers didn't just fight the enemy, they fought to survive the night. By the time spring arrived in 1915, over 500,000 men had been lost in battles most people have never heard of. This wasn't Verdun. This wasn't the Somme. This was the Eastern Front, and it was far, far bloodier. By early 1915, the Great War had already raged for 5 brutal months. While the Western Front descended into trench warfare and stalemate, the East told a different story, one of sweeping advances, collapsing armies, and desperate gambles. Russia held fragments of East Prussia and occupied much of Galicia, territory torn from Austria-Hungary in the opening campaigns. The Central Powers, meanwhile, controlled Poland's industrial heartland. But the real prize, and the real crisis, lay in a single fortress city, Przemyśl. This Austro-Hungarian stronghold guarded the gateway to the Hungarian plains. Inside its walls, over 120,000 soldiers were trapped under Russian siege, slowly starving. If Przemysl fell, nothing would stand between Russia and the heart of the Habsburg Empire. For Vienna, relief was not an option, it was survival. Austria-Hungary's high command faced a nightmare scenario. Their armies were already bloodied from defeats in Serbia and Galicia. Their soldiers, Czechs, Poles, Hungarians, Croats, Romanians, were a patchwork of languages and loyalties. Morale was fragile. Supplies were scarce. Winter was closing in, but the clock was ticking on Przemyśl. The fortress couldn't hold forever. Meanwhile, in St. Petersburg, Russian generals bickered over strategy. Some wanted to finish off Austria-Hungary. Others insisted Germany was the real threat. The Tsar's commanders couldn't agree, but they all wanted one thing: to attack. Germany, too, was planning an offensive. Their generals in the east, Hindenburg and Ludendorff, had become national heroes after smashing Russian invasions in 1914. Now they wanted to deliver a knockout blow in East Prussia, to erase the humiliation of Russian boots on German soil. 3 empires, 3 desperate plans, all converging on the same frozen wasteland at the same catastrophic moment. Something had to break. On January 23, 1915, Austria-Hungary struck first. General Svetozar Borojevic launched a massive offensive into the Carpathian Mountains, a jagged spine of peaks and valleys blanketed in snow. The plan was simple: smash through the Russian lines, break the siege of Przemyśl, and restore Habsburg honor. The execution was anything but simple. The Carpathians in winter were a death trap. Temperatures plunged to -30 degrees Celsius. Blizzards buried supply roads. Soldiers marched through waist-deep snow, frostbite claiming as many casualties as bullets. Artillery pieces froze solid. Horses collapsed and died by the thousands. And the Russians were waiting. Within days, the offensive stalled. Austro-Hungarian troops attacked uphill, into prepared Russian positions, wave after bloody wave. Machine guns raked the slopes. Shells turned the snow red. Entire battalions vanished into the white abyss. The Russians counterattacked with ferocity. They pushed the exhausted Austro-Hungarians back down the mountains, retaking ground that had cost thousands of lives to capture. By early February, the offensive had collapsed. But the horror was only beginning. While Austria-Hungary bled in the Carpathians, Germany launched its own attack 500 miles to the north. On February 7, 1915, German forces under Hindenburg and Ludendorff struck deep into Russian-held East Prussia. This was the second battle of the Masurian Lakes, and it was a masterpiece of tactical coordination. German columns punched through the Russian lines with shocking speed. Artillery pulverized defensive positions. Infantry advanced through frozen forests, encircling entire divisions. The Russians fought desperately, but they were outmaneuvered, outgunned, and overwhelmed. Within 2 weeks, the German trap snapped shut. The Russian 10th Army was surrounded in the Augusto Forest. Over 100,000 men were killed, wounded, or captured. East Prussia was liberated. Germany celebrated another brilliant victory. But strategically, it changed nothing. Russia's vast reserves replaced the losses within months. The Eastern Front remained active. The war ground on. Germany had won a battle, but the war was far from over. Still, the victory did something else. It exposed just how vulnerable Russia truly was. Austria-Hungary, meanwhile, refused to give up. In late February, they launched a second offensive into the Carpathians, bigger, more desperate, and doomed from the start. This time, the weather was even worse. Spring thaw turned the mountains into a muddy hellscape. Roads became rivers of freezing slush. Supply wagons sank axle deep. Artillery couldn't be moved. Soldiers marched without food for days, and the ammunition was running out. Austria-Hungary's industry couldn't keep pace with the war's demands. Guns fell silent for lack of shells. Soldiers attacked with bayonets, sometimes with nothing but rocks and bare hands. Officers begged for reinforcements that never came. The multi-ethnic Habsburg army began to crack. Czech and Romanian units mutinied. Polish soldiers deserted. Hungarians refused orders. Whispers of betrayal spread through the ranks. Officers no longer knew who they could trust. By mid-March, the offensive was a catastrophe. Austro-Hungarian casualties had soared past 600,000, killed, wounded, missing, frostbitten, or dead from disease. Entire divisions ceased to exist. And Przemyśl, still surrounded, still starving, still dying. On March 22, 1915, the inevitable happened. After 133 days of siege, with rations exhausted and hope gone, the commander of Przemyśl surrendered. Over 120,000 Austro-Hungarian soldiers marched into Russian captivity, the largest surrender of the war to that point. Russia erupted in celebration. Church bells rang across the empire. The Tsar awarded medals. For a moment, it seemed like victory was within reach. For Austria-Hungary, it was humiliation. The fortress they had bled to save was lost. The army they had sacrificed 500,000 men to preserve was shattered. The empire's prestige, already fragile, was in ruins. Vienna had no choice now. They turned to Berlin, begging for German help, not as equals, but as dependents. The proud Habsburg Empire was becoming a German puppet. But Russia couldn't capitalize. Flush with victory at Przemyśl, Russian commanders ordered one final push through the Carpathians, a grand offensive to break into Hungary and knock Austria-Hungary out of the war entirely. It began well. Russian troops surged forward, capturing mountain passes and threatening the plains beyond. For a brief moment, the road to Budapest seemed open. Then, the same problems that had destroyed the Austrians consumed the Russians. Supply lines stretched too far, ammunition ran low, Russia's factories couldn't match demand. Artillery fell silent, attacks slowed, then stopped. Exhausted soldiers dug in and waited for shells that never arrived. By April, the offensive was over. The Russians had won Przemyśl, but they couldn't break through. The front stabilized once again. Stalemate returned to the east, but at a cost that defied comprehension. Between January and April 1915, the Eastern Front consumed over 1.5 million men, killed, wounded, captured, or lost to the winter. The Carpathian battles alone produced more casualties than Verdun or the Somme, yet they're barely remembered today. No memorials mark the frozen slopes. No poets immortalized the agony. These battles vanished into history's shadows, but their consequences echoed across the war. Hungary emerged crippled, dependent on Germany, distrusted by its own soldiers, and teetering on the edge of collapse. The proud, multinational empire would never recover its strength. Russia, despite its victory at Przemyśl, had revealed fatal weaknesses: industrial backwardness, chronic ammunition shortages, and an inability to sustain offensives. Germany had taken note. Within weeks, the Central Powers would launch a new offensive, one designed not to push Russia back, but to destroy it entirely. The catastrophe of Gorlice Tarnów was coming. The winter battles of 1915 had set the stage. The Eastern Front's greatest tragedy was still ahead. The Eastern Front holds some of history's most brutal and forgotten stories. If you want to uncover more chapters like this, battles that changed the world but slipped through the cracks of memory, subscribe and join us as we bring the past back to life. The next story is waiting.